What does it mean to be Black in America? It means that you are born with one strike against you that you are working to overcome your entire life. However, you learn to use that strike against you, honestly, for your benefit.
To me, to be Black in America means that you have to work harder to do things, you have to do more with less.
Struggle, triumph, history.
I think it's recognizing the sacrifices of our ancestors, and even of our current generation, and also in that looking at the hope that comes from really recognizing how far we've come.
To be Black in America means that you have to strive hard to reach your goals.
To be Black in America means that you basically have to do the same thing that everyone else has to do, but you have to do it in high heels and backwards.
The things that influence my thoughts on being Black in America are just my experiences and my study and knowledge of African Americans, Black people.
Especially when I went to that PWI, those already having that small inkling, oh wow, she's not only a woman, but she's a Black woman. You know, so is she here on a diversity scholarship, you know, or is she here because she earned it?
It's not closing your eyes to the racism, to the oppression that still exists, but I think it's looking at the hope of our ancestors and recognizing we've come so far and we have the tenacity within us to keep moving our race forward.
The things that shape my thoughts about that are, of course, the recent things that are going on in America these days. Also growing up, hearing stories of things that my parents went through because segregation and things like that were still going on.
I think a lot of the influences that shape my thoughts about being Black in America are the ancestors that came before me, family members who came before me, Black women who came before me, who had to work really hard to reach their goals, and their stories and their struggles inspire me to do even more.
Race shapes the quality of life for Black Americans, but many times outside of our control, I think.
Well, I think race is a factor in shaping the quality of life for Black people because oftentimes people categorize people based off of their race.
I think I look at education in some ways as an equalizer, but also recognizing that in some ways it's set up against us. I think about even within schools, the rate of suspensions and discipline for our kids of color.
I think it's a huge factor. I mean, when we look at the disproportionate rates that Black men are incarcerated or get harsher sentencing in our judicial system, when we look at the rate that young African American boys and girls are sent to referrals in the school system, sent to special education, are told that they cannot succeed.
As an African American woman, you're immediately told limitations as to why you cannot have that raise or why you cannot vie for that higher position.
Well, when it comes to life opportunities, I think of affirmative action when it comes to maybe even sports head coaches. Yeah, they have to give them an interview, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they get hired.
I think some of the discriminatory practices would include classism, genderism. You can also think about institutional racism within the judicial system, within the school system as well, educational gaps that exist. Those things influence where Black people stand in society.
Unequal access to finances or the access to finance is detrimental to success in America.
Black privilege is one's ability to have certain gains in society based off of their race.
Black privilege. I am unsure of what Black privilege is.
Oftentimes we look at it from the standpoint of white privilege. So it's almost difficult to take yourself out of it and say, okay, what privileges do we as African Americans have that we subconsciously don't know?
I don't think there is Black privilege. privilege. I have never experienced anything that Black gets a privilege from for being Black.
I think in some ways that's an oxymoron. I think you typically hear privilege attached to white, and that idea that the privilege that's inherent is unearned. And so when I hear the term Black privilege, one, I think it immediately makes me think of white privilege and the juxtaposition of those two.
So privilege in that regard would be certain skills or traits that someone possesses that would profit others.
And because I'm an African American and I'm a woman, so that's double minority, that in turn is a piece of Black privilege because I'm afforded the opportunity to go to a prestigious school on a scholarship just simply because of my race and my gender.
If it's a privilege to be discriminated against, that's Black privilege. If it's a privilege to be considered less than, I guess that's Black privilege. It's a privilege to be considered your role is to be the life of the party, then I guess that's Black privilege. If your privilege is that you can wear your hair 15 different ways in 7 days, then I guess that's Black privilege.
While being Black is often looked at as a disadvantage, I think it's something that should be looked at as an advantage and something that should be honored. We are uniquely made, and despite our race, we have things that we can offer to America and to our culture.
Barriers, I think, that prevent us from connecting to society. One, education.
When it comes down to us as a community, as a culture within itself, we have certain ways of learning. The ways in which we learn and the ways in which we interpret things are a lot different from those outside of our race.
I think segregated housing, segregated schools, segregated churches, that makes it difficult for African Americans to connect with society. But I think it's not necessarily difficult to connect. I don't necessarily know if society wants to connect.
I think the largest barrier to African Americans, Black people, not being fully accepted into society is one is bigotry, is hatred, it's the demonization of one group of people.
The largest barrier would just be the mindset of people not taking a chance or not even thinking that because someone is African American that they cannot do or they don't do a good as job as anybody else would.
Stereotype, history, prejudice, discrimination, slavery. I mean, the list kind of goes on.
Sometimes like the lack of knowledge or the lack of communication in terms of like technology and resources to access other societies.
I believe that the majority is fearful that we are intelligent, we are talented, and that's why they put so many limitations on us. Institutionalized racism exists simply because they have to put these barriers in place to limit us, because they know that if they didn't have those barriers, because we're talented, because we're intelligent, we could rule the world.
The question of whether or not the rest of the community desires to connect to African Americans as a whole.